This is Chapter 3, The Counter-Terrorism Expert. What happened with Nike executive Megan Carl, as we saw in the previous chapter, is concerningly similar to what happened to Detective Superintendent Jonathan Wilson. Textbook bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity strike again. Carl is in the United States, and Wilson is in the United Kingdom. Carl is a top performer at a corporation. Wilson, a top performer with the police. Both are talented, recognized throughout their careers for excellence, repeatedly promoted, and yet, when they're targeted for bullying, their respective institutions turn a blind eye. As reported by Michael Gillard and Fiona Hamilton, quote, Wilson, 56, who suffered a nervous breakdown, said the Met Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, who was then in charge of counterterrorism, turned a blind eye to his treatment. Far too many leaders turn a blind eye, think they're in control, believe it's a show of power, but really, they're blind to betrayal. And the betrayal does not come from the target. It comes from the dark triad. Both Carl and Wilson resigned, and in both cases, a few years later, national news reported on their workplaces as enabling a bullying culture. The exact same pattern happened to me. So now we have United States, United Kingdom, and Canada producing very similar case studies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity. The only real difference in these case studies appears to be the location. In the bullying belief system, the victims are targeted because they are weak or have some obvious flaw or difference that makes it understandable why they are the focus of maltreatment. This myth spurs people to say to me all the time, I was bullied because I stop them every time and set them straight. I tell them that the bullying has nothing to do with them. You should see quickly that this myth contains within it the essential lies, that those who are bullied deserve it because they are not worthy and they do not belong. They have some weakness or difference. It's hard to see Detective Superintendent Jonathan Wilson as weak, being unworthy based on any kind of trumped up difference you can think of, and not belonging. If he had a history of these qualities, it might make more sense. But as we see with Carl, McFarlane, Wilson, and me, it's the opposite history until the fateful moment when we are targeted. We have histories of strength, worth, and belonging that apparently become irrelevant when we speak up. All of us have differences, as does every human being, but no one was able to fault us for it or say that it resulted in our maltreatment. As is well established, many are not so lucky. Their race, sexual orientation, class, lack of education, immigration status, religion, financial status, disability, age, anything that sticks can make them traditional targets of maltreatment and slate them for unjust suffering. Some fall for the myth when they're put in the outgroup, but it gets harder to believe it when you examine white, educated, privileged individuals like Carl, McFarlane, Wilson, and me. Of course, Carl, McFarlane, and I belong to the outgroup, which is women, and where women are put, but we still had protected privileges many others do not enjoy. Our targeting puts in doubt the bully myth that it is X that puts someone in the outgroup. Apparently, anyone can be put in the outgroup, which reminds us how false all the categories are that have justified and still do maltreatment. As a white male who had proven himself in arguably the toughest profession, Wilson's mistake that brought the full force of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity to his doorstep was the same as mine. Reporting wrongdoing, exposing corrupt practices, calling out abuse and gaslighting. Institutions like Wilson's and mine rarely, if ever, advertise that they have zero tolerance for truth-telling when it comes to abusive, corrupt practices. Part of succeeding in these kinds of workplaces requires you to look the other way. Then you are rewarded. I witnessed it firsthand, and so did Wilson. Policing, police leadership, working in counterterrorism did not mentally unravel Wilson, but being exposed to the betrayal of his colleagues did. When our brains are certain who is an enemy and who is a colleague, they can perform effectively. But when our brains can't identify the threat, can't anticipate it, can't protect against it, can't strive to outwit it, can't employ strategies and techniques with our team to save others, we struggle to remain clear-headed and sane. When our brains cannot identify the threat because it's coming from within our team, when we've been trained for years to believe in our colleagues and leaders, only to discover they're lying and corrupt, the brain struggles to remain clear and steady. It's far more likely, even for those of us who have extreme mental strength, such as Wilson, to suffer a nervous breakdown and succumb to such extreme mental suffering. It can lead to suicidal ideation. Working closely with others for decades at a workplace creates connection and community, both fundamental to brain health. As a leader in the Counterterrorism Command, the CTC, when Wilson spoke up about the textbook culture of targets and beneficiaries, what he refers to as a culture of bullying and nepotism, he found himself ostracized. This word resonates painfully for me. When my son Montgomery spoke up, along with many other students, past and present, about the bullying by teachers with their beneficiaries and targets, he found himself ostracized. His shunning was carefully orchestrated by the leader and supported by the director, board, and the chaplain. The leader promised confidentiality to all the students who reported the abuse. Then he told one of the 3 abusers which boys had come forward. The leader promised new coaching the following year, creating a sense that it was safe to speak up. But then he kept the abusers in position. They never missed a day, regardless of their ongoing targeting and the supposedly independent investigations into their conduct. Many pitied the poor teachers who had multiple abuse reports about them because the leader carefully covered up the allegations every step of the way, with the help of lawyers he hired and ultimately the educational regulator. Students, not knowing any better, aligned themselves with the aggressors, kept in positions of power, and took out their confusion on Montgomery and a few other boys. The rest of the students' identities were kept protected, so many were reporting abuse that it would have cast doubt on the leader's gaslighting. As I drove Montgomery to a bogus interview that would be conducted by a lawyer hired by the leader to cover up, he asked me at 16 if ostracized was the right word for what was happening to him. I told him it was. I knew he was being singled out to shut me up. He didn't end up using the word because, as he told me, the lawyer didn't ask him about the abuse he had endured or witnessed done to others. Instead, he asked a few leading questions such as, quote, "You don't really have to see the 2 teachers who you've complained about during the school day, do you?" End quote. A teenager, Montgomery knew the internal investigation was a sham. It was paid for by the administrators who were heavily invested in ensuring that their knowledge of the abuse of a year at least and on paper was not uncovered. They did not want to be exposed as negligent with all the serious accountability that brings. The investigative report was such a sham that it was reproduced in full in national news. The brain is wired for social connection, and an institution that blocks it, that ostracizes the victims, that scapegoats the truth tellers, is using a powerful and effective weapon to harm them. Montgomery suffered a severe depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. Megan Carl became desperately unwell to the point she had to choose between her job and her health. I developed ulcers all over my throat. Jonathan Wilson had a nervous breakdown and became suicidal. Julie McFarlane has cancer. All these mental and physical responses are extensively documented in research as correlated with the kind of maltreatment we endured in our workplaces. It's important to understand that psychological safety also means physical, neurological, and physiological safety. Unsafe workplaces don't just crush toes that aren't in steel-toed boots, cause concussions to heads without helmets, result in accidents for those without reflective vests. Unsafe workplaces that enable and cover up the lies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity crush employees on equally serious and life-threatening levels. A lawyer arguing that psychological safety cannot be measured because it is about mindset and integrity, and thus cannot be the legal responsibility of the institution, appears not to know that the impact of maltreatment can be measured on brain scans, with blood tests, through biomarkers, by taking blood pressure readings, checking the heart rate, and assessing gut health. It is hardly surprising that we have 4 concerningly similar case studies of individuals targeted in their workplace for maltreatment, repeatedly exposed to the lies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity, who all fall seriously ill. A child's workplace is a school, so Montgomery makes 5. In a bid to save his health and sanity, Wilson resigned from the force in 2020, humiliated and gaslit after he was told that his allegations lacked evidence and were meritless. He was positioned as someone who fabricated bullying because it just didn't happen. 3 years later, the Baroness of Blackstock, quote, published an excoriating report into the force that exposed entrenched bullying. She investigated London's Metropolitan Police for a year and discovered rampant homophobic, racist, and misogynistic bullying. The carefully constructed narrative or smear campaign that Wilson was a complainer about behavior that was completely acceptable suddenly collapsed. Casey discovered a police force ruled by, quote, denial, hubris, and a lack of candor. Leadership that denies bullying has occurred and is a serious threat in the workplace is formed by individuals too proud to admit failure, even when necessary to protect their employees. They suffer from hubris. Leadership that refuses to take responsibility for harm taking place on their watch must resort to lack of candor or more forcefully lies, cover-ups, and institutional complicity with bullying and gaslighting. Let's circle back to the mythology that something about the target makes them activate the maltreatment of perpetrators. Notice how the reversal has slipped into Casey's report. The focus is not on the perpetrator, the active transmitting agent of bullying, abuse, and harassment. The focus has strangely shifted to the passive receiver of bullying, abuse, and harassment. We would be surprised to read about perpetrators in the police being discussed in terms of their sexual orientation, their racial background, and their feelings around women. In contrast, we're not surprised. In fact, in many cases, we completely normalize this information as it applies to victims. It's like our brains need some reason to understand why those empowered to protect people are harming them. It doesn't make sense, so we seek information to explain it. We use categories, information about targets, to understand how cruel and destructive conduct occurred on the part of perpetrators. Wouldn't it make more sense to analyze what is it about the perpetrators, where they came from, their sexual orientation, their education or lack thereof, whether they're financially at risk, their racial background, religion, possible disability, that leads to bullying and gaslighting. Analyzing victims won't give us the information we need to understand destructive behavior. Megan Carl saw misogyny as a focus of the bullying at Nike. At my workplace, it was a combination of homophobia and misogyny, with some racism being used against teenage boys. In Wilson's police force, it's homophobia, misogyny, and racism. In McFarland's workplace, an abuser is protected from public scrutiny who sexually targets female students, which we could categorize as misogyny. Granted, McFarland, Carl, and I are women, so we might say we were bullied and gaslit at work because we were women. But we hit a stumbling block with Montgomery and Wilson. The myth fully breaks down at this point because Montgomery is white and male, on the headmaster's honor roll, an exceptional athlete, popular, 6'4" and a heterosexual. He isn't an immigrant or a migrant. He isn't female or LGBTQ+. He's white, privileged, educated. They had no quick and easy way to push him into the outgroup, but they did. Wilson is white and male, heterosexual, a leader in a high-stakes policing unit, a rugby player, popular, well-recognized after almost 30 years of service as being a likely choice for next in command at the highest level. No quick and easy way to shunt him into an outgroup. But once again, they did. One of the key perpetrators in his maltreatment was a white woman in a position of power. How do we maintain our bullying myth in these contexts? These targets don't supply us with the answers we want to figure out how bullying and gaslighting work and why institutions are complicit in protecting and enabling perpetrators. If it is true that being in the privileged position of educated, financially secure, white, straight male without a disability and born in the country where they work means you cannot be manipulated by the lies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity, Montgomery and Wilson cast doubt on the whole construct. They are crucial to my psychological study of lying because they highlight that all the other categories we use to explain and justify to ourselves why certain targets are singled out or whole populaces are singled out is the biggest lie of all. Nonetheless, far too many still believe this foundational lie. If we want to halt rampant bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity in the workplace, we need to be laser focused on the perpetrator. We need to stop trying to figure out what's wrong or weak or different about the target that led to the destructive, manipulative conduct. Those who gaslight lean heavily on a conjured enemy, whether it's women or migrants or visible minorities, or people in poverty, LGBTQ+, or people with disabilities, targeted religions, people who laugh a certain way. Instead of examining the trumped up target of bullying and gaslighting, we're more likely to solve this destructive issue in our workplaces by homing in on the perpetrators and why they need an enemy in the first place to define their own value or to mirror their untouchable power. In our focus on targets, we fail to examine the brains of perpetrators. Even the laws expose our skewed way of thinking. Certain categories of victims are protected because they are seen as more vulnerable and are targeted more frequently. I'm not saying that they don't need these protections. What I am saying is that the law needs to turn fully around and apply legal sanctions against perpetrators, regardless of whom they target. All individuals have the right to safety, health, and fair treatment at work. All individuals who target others' rights to safety, health, and fair treatment need to be held legally accountable. If we had stringent laws, rules, regulations that created psychologically safe workplaces, they would demand compliance, act as a deterrent, spur education and training. Where are the laws for perpetrators of bullying, perpetrators of gaslighting, those who are pathological liars, and for those in institutions who are complicit in these extremely serious and harmful violations? In Casey's report, her assessment makes crystal clear that bullying does not need a protected class of targets to do its harm. Quote, Casey found a broader culture of bullying with over 1/5 of Met officers and staff surveyed having experienced it in the workplace. According to her report, quote, those who do not conform to the prevailing culture face discrimination, bullying, and barriers to thriving and progressing in their career. If they speak out, they will be labeled a troublemaker. But even if they walk the line, the organization may still decide that their face doesn't fit. Montgomery's face didn't fit. Wilson's face didn't fit. Both of them spoke up about a prevailing culture of abuse. That was enough, like so many others, for them to be targeted for bullying behaviors that attacked them, blocked them from opportunities, lied to them and about them, and scrambled their relationship to others and even to their own reality. How do you avoid this fate in a bullying and gaslighting institution? You must conform to the prevailing culture, even if it means compromising your sense of authenticity, your integrity, and your empathy. That's a lot to sacrifice. And the case studies in the Gaslit Brain look at individuals from my teenage son to superstar leaders in their fields, such as Wilson, Carl, and McFarland, who refuse to conform. Institutions that ignore reports by privileged, thus safer, individuals such as Montgomery and Wilson run a risk. Why? Because if these individuals speak up, chances are very good that many others aren't in as solid or protected a position to report the harm being done. If you are in a group typically targeted for injustice and maltreatment, women, LGBTQ+, visible minority, Jewish, Islamic, lacking in education, disabled, suffering from poverty, an immigrant, etc., you are more likely to keep a low profile and not run the risk of being singled out for even more maltreatment. Abusive individuals never only lie once, abuse one target, break one rule, financially do one corrupt act. They are compelled to do these destructive acts over and over again. They can be identified quickly by the pattern of their behavior. Institutions that choose to ignore reports of their maltreatment are wise to make this choice based on the fact that there's absolutely no pattern. All the case studies discussed in the Gaslit Brain include multiple reports of abuse. The patterns are glaring, but the institution still chooses to protect the perpetrators and re-victimize the targets. As Matt Dathan reports, after her year-long investigation, Baroness Casey's findings on Wilson's workplace, quote, speak to a fundamental rupture in the bond of trust between the police and the public. She warned that the police's relationship with the public is at a breaking point, and the decline in trust among women and Black people in London risks spreading to the rest of the country. Only wholesale and radical reform of policing can restore trust and confidence in the police, Casey said. Notice that Casey uses the imagery of contagion, maltreatment, injustice in the police, upholders of justice, who she finds are putting some into outgroups and not protecting them. All of it is like a virus that risks spreading. Institutions are at risk of this virus as well, but we still see all too often, instead of containing it, doing the hard work to protect their employees, they allow it to spread. A glance at the news in the past few years reveals that the breakdown in trust in police forces is not unique to the United Kingdom. It is also a repeatedly pressing issue in the United States and in Canada. It's a reminder that even the institutions empowered with the rule of law, the pursuit of justice, and the high-stakes mission to protect all, not just beneficiaries, can succumb to cultures built on falsehoods that fuel bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity. What does this ultimately lead to? A culture constructed on lies, the breakdown of trust. The only thing that stands between our sanity and our insanity is the truth. To remain healthy, we need to have trust in others with whom we share reality. What was Wilson's reaction to Casey's investigation? Quote, a huge sense of relief that he was not crazy. Notice the identical sense of relief and even word choice by Carl. Both were gaslit and both worried they were crazy. Wilson's statement exposes gaslighting in its essence. Gaslighting is all about making the targets lose trust in their own perceptions, their own sense of reality. This breakdown in trust expands and infects the institution. Those in power start controlling the narrative on what's true and what's false, which replaces reality with self-serving illusion. And as we saw with Casey's report, the breakdown in trust can infect whole nations at risk of destabilization through terrorism, but lack a stable, trustworthy base from which to mount a defense. Although it's challenging, potentially destabilizing, we will be healthier, saner, and safer if we admit that institutional complicity is a possibility and prepare ourselves to recognize the red flags. When you read the media coverage of Wilson's maltreatment, the signs are clear that institutional complicity is compounding the lies of bullying and gaslighting. Note that the internal investigation into his workplace complaint comes back with the strange assessment, nothing to report here. Right away, it begs the question, if nothing is going on, why are respected individuals going through the incredibly difficult and painful process of reporting maltreatment? In brief, here's what was happening. Wilson reports, striving to implement key changes as a leader and meeting resistance around sharing information. Being told those he's in charge of are complaining about him, but when he checks with them, they don't know what he's referring to. Being told he's lost the trust of MI5 and the Home Office, to whom he regularly reports. Having key resources, such as whole teams of his officers, being taken away without warning. Being excluded from meetings he needs to attend. Being pulled into ambush meetings repeatedly where there are no witnesses. Reporting to a higher up and being treated with contempt and ridicule. Told that, in fact, he is the problem. If you didn't notice the textbook Gaslighting at work in all the falsehoods used to manipulate Wilson and destabilize him, the final reversal ought to be obvious. When you report wrongdoing in a workplace constructed on the lies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity, reversal occurs. The perpetrator becomes the victim becomes the perpetrator. This brief list does not convey the impacts of bullying and gaslighting lies. Wilson says these allegations, which he didn't suspect were false, made him feel mortified and none the wiser how to put it right. Then more false allegations of upsetting colleagues followed, which he says was an attempt to, quote, destroy my confidence and my credibility. Our laws prohibit us from destroying property, but they seem to fall apart when it comes to destroying a colleague with lies. Now listen to how Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley tries to explain away the nothing to report here in the media, keeping in mind the list of reported maltreatment. Rowley said he accepted the Met had not always been tough enough on building a positive culture, but added, when disputes arise, independent investigations, such as in this case, are the best way to find a fair resolution. Sadly, parties will not always agree with the outcome of these investigations. The findings of the independent review into Mr. Wilson's allegations at the time found insufficient evidence for them to be upheld. Note the strange phrase, not always being tough enough on building a positive culture. This odd phrasing insinuates that lack of toughness led to Wilson's demise. It insinuates a lack of toughness in Wilson, who couldn't tough out the negative culture. Perhaps Crowley wants to say that the Met needs to get tough enough to hold perpetrators of abuse accountable. This statement would be accurate, except that he's using it in a series of phrases to discredit Wilson and prop up his culture of institutionally sanctioned bullying and gaslighting. It's not like Rowley didn't know Wilson or hadn't worked with him before. Rowley was assistant commissioner responsible for counterterrorism when Wilson raised concerns about bullying. But before, they had worked together in organized crime with the Home Secretary and held monthly meetings. As is typical in bullying scenarios, when targets speak up, their track record is erased and a new reputation is constructed in the moment to discredit them. Note that Crowley repeats independent twice. Repetition is often a signifier that regardless of the truth, the speaker wants you to become a believer. Crowley says the Met undertakes independent investigations and in Wilson's case conducted an independent review. When I spoke with Wilson, he told me that this so-called independent review was done by an ex-HR and was not independent. The use of partisan investigators is a tried and true trick used repeatedly where I worked. Wilson explained to me that he was off sick and the ex-HR had his email but did not contact him. Nor did the ex-HR get in touch with two witnesses that he said they were going to come back to. In his investigation, the ex-HR took, "I don't remember," as legitimate responses without follow-up. Wilson shares that the investigation was completely inadequate. If it was truly independent and fair, Rowley wouldn't have to keep repeating independent. Note that he does not say it was done by an ex-HR. Instead of facts, you get repetition of the narrative they want you to believe. If it was so accurate and so independent, how is it possible that Baroness Casey of Blackstock's investigation came to a glaringly opposite conclusion? Abuse and failure were so rampant in the complaints, it had the potential to infect the nation with lack of trust in the police force. Considering the reprehensible damage done to Wilson's career and health, Casey's truly independent investigation was pure vindication and exposure of the lies that proliferated around him. Not only did Casey's report find a bullying culture, but it also highlighted the nightmare Wilson went through, ridiculed by those to whom he reported serious lies and manipulations. Casey refers to it as an ineffective complaints process, but when you hear what it was like to suffer institutional betrayal as Wilson did, the official language seems inadequate to convey the damage done. Wilson requested a meeting to report the bullying with Deputy Assistant Commander Helen Ball, whom he knew and respected. Her public persona, such as speaking up in the past about women's rights, positioned her in Wilson's mind as someone who cares about human rights and was trustworthy. Her response to the request, noting that the Met didn't tolerate bullying, furthered those mistaken beliefs. A week later, confidently going alone without witnesses, Wilson encountered a shock. He describes the decision to go alone as the biggest mistake of his service. Ball had already consulted the two officers who were bullying Wilson. As he tried to narrate the bullying being done to him, she repeatedly said contemptuously, "That is your view." The repetition that his interpretation is his alone, not shared, not part of the team, not trustworthy, reinforced by contempt, which conveys that he was unworthy of consideration, all screams gaslighting. Then she issues the purest gaslighting lie. "From everything I've heard, you're the problem." When a victim who reports bullying suddenly morphs into the perpetrator, then you have entered fully into gaslighting's hall of mirrors. Now, if Wilson had a history of lying, wrongly accusing colleagues, being untrustworthy, Ball's reaction would have been reasonable. But he has the opposite history. The fact that in this meeting it goes up in smoke while she accuses him of wrongdoing, you can easily recognize the lies of bullying and gaslighting. Notably, those he identifies as behaving in bullying and corrupt ways have concerning histories that, as usual, reveal the pattern of their complicated relationship with the truth. Baroness Casey calls this an ineffective complaints process. Wilson explains its actual impact on the victim. Quote, "I went into that meeting a broken man, and I came out destroyed." Ball suggests that he get some counseling. Another glaring sign of gaslighting. "Your perceptions are not to be trusted. You don't know what's real and what's not. You're crazy. You need help." The perpetrators don't need counseling. The victims do. Note that Crowley uses the condescending term "sadly" when he talks about the independent investigation. He says, "Sadly, parties will not always agree with the outcome of these investigations." Is it sad? Or is it really worrisome that the assistant commissioner in charge of the counterterrorism group refers to credible reports of bullying, lies, and manipulations by one of his top leaders, compelled to formally report because he's being further maltreated internally, and the commissioner does not seem clear on what is an effective investigation and what is further manipulation? He doesn't have concerns about a review that finds nothing happened. Does Crowley really want to say there was insufficient evidence? His language sounds official. It belongs to the world of police investigations. It's just that Baroness Casey's investigation revealed something deeply concerning that would have been covered up by leaders like Rowley without her report. The Met Police appear to produce evidence when it suits them in cases of beneficiaries who belong to the in-group, but don't find evidence of wrongdoing when the target is not white, not male, not straight, not anything else they decide is fair game for dismissing and denying basic human rights of safety and security. As noted, Wilson was white, male, and straight, but when psychopaths are at work, anyone can be a target. As we look at in greater detail, conjuring up or suppressing evidence, depending on what suits the agenda, are markers of the psychopathic brain. As we see in the workplaces under study in this book, the psychopathic brain appears able to infect whole workplaces. When Crowley uses the manipulative term disputes to describe the bullying and gaslighting and talks about the differing parties, you should be on high alert that all is not right. Instead of the hazy, noisy, soft focus of institutional complicity at work. When a perpetrator targets someone for bullying and gaslighting, it is not a dispute. The target is simply reporting abusive conduct. Either the conduct occurred or not. If it didn't occur, there needs to be evidence as to why it was falsely reported. None of this can be described as a dispute. This manipulation is what my gaslighting workplace tried to make me believe. I reported abuse being done to students by the drama teacher. They acted like we had an interpersonal issue to sort out and brought us to the table, face to face with the director, to do just that. It was a complete sham that enabled more and more abuse until the drama teacher was finally fired. Note that, as usual, they were already well informed about the drama teacher's pattern of abuse. I was merely one voice among many, But shutting me down, silencing me, sent a message to others that truth-telling was unacceptable. Looking the other way would be rewarded. Rowley's use of the term sadly serves to publicly dismiss and deny one of his top employees, one of his leaders in an elite unit, one of the best. Pretty strong message for the other employees at the Met who are not anywhere near the stature of Detective Superintendent Jonathan Wilson of the CTC, who reports regularly to MI5 and the Home Office, and who has earned this position during a stellar 28-year career. Weigh those facts against Rowley's sadness that the review, as is textbook, found that Wilson must be at fault for bringing forth bullying allegations that were a figment of his imagination, or a lie, or a sign that he's mentally unhinged, or whatever. Just like Montgomery and the other students were telling nasty lies, according to the slippery language, the anonymous quote used by the lawyer, hired by the leader to reach the result, nothing happened here. Sadly, Rowley seems to emote, what Wilson experienced was not true, not real. This is textbook gaslighting. Rowley is stating in public that Wilson cannot trust his own perception, needs to doubt his own sanity. It didn't matter that Wilson had 28 years of not reverting to imaginings, not lying, not being unhinged. Is it surprising when institutions take out their top gun? Or is it textbook? We see a pattern emerging with Carl, McFarlane, Wilson, and me. In my workplace, I was one of 2 teachers who had earned a PhD. I was the only teacher published by both an American and a Canadian university press. I'd earned an award for teaching excellence. But when I reported the abuse that I was hearing about directly from parents and students, I became instantly dismissible and worse. Why sacrifice your best and brightest? I first witnessed this disturbing pattern with Montgomery, where those who abuse target the best to keep everyone else in check, quiet, deferential, fawning, afraid. This is the acquiescence culture that Wilson's colleagues detail. Even though it meant that the team could not win, the 2 teachers kept Montgomery on the bench. They used this same pattern with the junior team and with the past senior teams. It wasn't new or startling. It was a pattern. The female teacher did the same, as multiple students reported from grade 11 to second-year university. It was well documented, par for the course. Talent was not allowed to play and was repeatedly put down. The school administrators and Commissioner for Teacher Regulation dismissed all allegations. 10 years later, she is still facing serious allegations from athletes and their parents. It's a pattern. As the athletic director, she also targeted talented coaches. She used the same techniques dished out to Wilson. A coach would be kept from key meetings and would not be informed when her team was competing. The students told her how disappointed they were that she didn't show up. Notice the disconnect, which is a red flag of gaslighting. On the one hand, the teachers put in writing that Montgomery was one of the best players ever seen in a school more than 100 years old. On the other hand, he was almost never put on the court. Pretty strong message for the other players who don't have the same skills. If your top performer, not just in the moment, but in terms of the school's history, can be shot down through no fault of his own, it's an excellent tried and true way to solidify your power base. You manifest coercion and control when you eliminate those who may threaten your leadership by their talent. Why else bully and drive out the likes of Montgomery, Carl, McFarlane, and Wilson? Those who bully and gaslight rarely feel secure. They know that their position hinges on wrongdoing, not meritocracy or healthy leadership, and thus they seem to suffer from paranoia. This isn't a new phenomenon. One of the most stunning portrayals of this dynamic is taught in schools like the one Montgomery attended. Shakespeare's Macbeth is a study of corrupt leadership that strives to eliminate all threats to power, only to find itself more and more insecure, paranoid, and destabilized. The witches are symbolic figures for gaslighting. Lady Macbeth's insane drive for power and prestige is a case study in the dark triad and what is going on in their dysregulated brains. The Macbeths try to destroy all competition, all threats to the king's position, of which he is unworthy. When Wilson realizes that he cannot trust his colleagues, he starts looking over his shoulder. He has lost trust in the police. His livelihood is entwined with the betrayal, and he's dependent on his employer for his career, which supports him and his family. As in all the case studies we look at that involve bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity, language is key. You cannot know that you're being lied to and betrayed by those you thought you could trust without the vocabulary to describe it. Wilson explains, quote, "It all started to click, and I realized what had happened with this bullying, these ambush meetings. It was gaslighting. I didn't even know the term gaslighting before. It really impacted on my confidence. It felt like I was looking behind my back all the time. For someone with 25 years in, I thought I'd seen the worst life could throw at you. I thought I was a pretty resilient guy." Wilson sees his demise as beginning after he called out corrupt practices. When he took a leadership position in the CTC, he was shocked to discover that a deal had been struck whereby detectives, with full demands on their time due to the terrorist threat, were in fact being used as free security guards at Wimbledon. Quote, "He said he angered colleagues when he questioned why detectives who had full workloads were being allowed to attend Wimbledon to work as paid stewards for a private security company." Wilson put a target on his back out of the gate by shutting down this corrupt practice. Abusive workplaces that enable bullying and gaslighting have no stomach for integrity. Rowley does not mention the corrupt Wimbledon deal. It's another fact he skips over. Wimbledon is a beautiful example of institutional complicity at the CTC. Wilson explained to me the details when we spoke. Quote, "When I first started, I found out that 40 of my officers for the last 10 to 15 years were being used once a year as private security on public sector pay at Wimbledon. Senior level police were getting free tickets to Wimbledon as a thank you. I said, this is outrageous. We've got senior level counter-terrorism police covering a private sporting match. I put a stop to it." When Wilson is being bullied and gaslit, one wonders if senior level police look the other way because they didn't like being called out on a glaringly corrupt practice. The key is to notice the agenda at work so that if betrayal occurs and you are targeted, you recognize that you are being sacrificed, as likely many before, to the culture of the institution. Just look at the glowing language Rowley used when, in the context of Wilson and his maltreatment, he consciously chooses to sing the praises of the CTC. Skipping over Wimbledon and the way in which Wilson's first act as counterterrorism leader was to shut down the corruption, this is how Rowley speaks to the media. Quote, "Those years were among the most challenging in my policing career as we confronted the very real threat of terrorism in the heart of London and across the UK. I am proud of my record and of the outstanding men and women I led, who worked together in a professional and determined way to save lives." Saving lives did not seem to be a priority during Wimbledon. Working under the radar for a private security company at a tennis tournament for the wealthy and privileged while being paid by taxpayers does not usually conjure up terms like proud or professional or outstanding. His emphasis on the team and how worthy they are informs us through insinuation that Wilson deserves the bullying he endured. Here are the essential lies. Wilson is unworthy and does not belong by sidestepping what was done to Wilson and instead singing the praises of his own leadership in the CTC. Rowley subtly suggests that Wilson wasn't a team player, wasn't able to get on with his colleagues. And as Rowley reminds us, these colleagues were outstanding. They used their professionalism and determination to save lives. Wilson's colleagues, speaking to a journalist, told a radically different story of their workplace. "I am sorry to report that I can see right through the manipulative gaslighting here because it's so similar to what was done to me." The leader praised the teachers with multiple reports of abuse for their professionalism, without saying what exactly it centered on. He did not ever share the facts of the abuse reports, or the lies that these teachers told to cover up what they had done, or the way that they sat back and allowed the students, whom they had victimized, to be labeled by the leader as telling nasty lies. Personally, I couldn't find any professionalism, just like I would struggle along with Wilson to find professionalism in the CTC that spent a few weeks at Wimbledon every year while the threat of terrorism loomed and women and Black people were at extreme risk. When I applied for another job, the leader told my potential employer that I was an excellent teacher but couldn't get along with my colleagues. In gaslighting, a statement is designed to confuse. It insinuates rather than offer clear, factual commentary. It uses hazy, veiled ways of praising perpetrators to condemn and ostracize targets who have had the audacity to report what's really happening. Cutting through Rowley's rhetoric for the media, we can reasonably assume that the most challenging years of his policing career in the CTC did not include watching the glitterati at a famed tennis competition. Rowley's failure to acknowledge that the Met Police and their leaders were called out by Wilson for irresponsible and corrupt behavior like this. His sweeping such conduct under the carpet with a rousing comment on how dedicated the counterterrorism police are to citizen safety smacks of gaslighting. Rowley presents us with a version of the Met Police elite unit that is associated with power, credibility, and social standing. He participates in the cover-up of maltreatment and corruption. The Met's risky, untrustworthy, and shameful culture that Baroness Casey exposed. Wilson rejected the cover-up and called out the truth at the CTC, and as a result, he was destroyed. As Wilson's colleagues reported, quote, the CTC's clubby culture, they say, prefers to promote internally and protects favorites while punishing those who speak out about Spanish practices involving perks, overtime, and foreign trips. Wimbledon was not a one-off corrupt practice. It never is. It is the smoke that tells you the fires of abuse and corruption burn brightly behind closed doors. In textbook fashion, the one who reports bullying, abuse, or corruption is identified as the actual problem and is driven out. The perpetrators are protected and the victim is re-victimized. As Wilson put it in terms of the bullying, quote, I just wanted it to stop. I wasn't looking to get anyone in trouble, but I was ridiculed when I raised my concerns. They saw me as the problem. I was told Rowley had suggested the solution was to move me out of the CTC into a report writing role, and the next day I was gone. It's very difficult to connect this Rowley, who after a disturbing report on bullying practices, takes Wilson, one of his best, certainly one with far more integrity than the others, and moves him out of the most challenging unit, one with outstanding police, one that stands between citizen safety and serious threat. I mean, if the counterterrorism unit was just about gigs, such as watching over Wimbledon or other corrupt practices that Wilson and others report, that'd be easier to understand. But if the counterterrorism unit is, as Rowley describes, why would he scapegoat a talented, trusted police leader such as Wilson? These are the questions we must ask if we want to exit workplaces ruled by the lies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity. If we don't want a breakdown in the trust people have in institutions, we need to change this normalized, abusive culture. Rowley's comment about the counterterrorism unit does not mention Wilson's demand for it to have integrity. Instead, the glowing comment he provides to the media serves to further discredit Wilson, once a trusted leader in a high-stakes position who was forced into early retirement and rendered dangerously ill when he should have been at the summit of his career. It appears from Rowley's comments that discredit him, Wilson may have threatened Met higher-ups. He made them paranoid. If, as Casey discovered, the force is corrupted by bullying and shameful practices such as Wimbledon, you can well imagine they're putting a lot of energy into keeping that ugly truth from the public. If those who use bullying and gaslighting to keep a firm grip on their coercion and control style of leadership are exposed, threatened, questioned about their integrity, which could reveal a whole manner of breaking laws and rules, it ramps up their fears. They feel paranoid, and through gaslighting reversal, infect their victim with this painful sensation. The bullies who targeted Wilson reported to him false complaints about him. They lied. This was their strategy to manipulate him. They turned to the essential lies of bullying. You are unworthy, you do not belong. As noted and worth repeating, Wilson, quote, was called to ambush meetings and told that unnamed members of staff had complained about his interpersonal skills. Wilson claimed that he faced further false allegations to destroy my confidence and my credibility, including being told that he'd lost the confidence of MI5 in the Home Office. He said he was excluded from meetings. They gave him performance reviews that had no feedback. Textbook gaslighting, all of it. These officers are pouring cognition and language into creating an illusion of wrongdoing being done by an innocent victim, a colleague, a leader. If this kind of conduct is acceptable in the Met Police at the CTC, then we're all at risk. As Casey says, the nation is at risk. Where are the laws that hold these gaslighting employees accountable? Their conduct suggests they may have seriously, dangerously dysregulated brains. Where are the neurological assessments and requirements by doctors giving them a clean bill of health before they return to their high stakes positions? Perpetrators lack accountability. The ones who destroyed Wilson's career and health apparently were conducting business as usual and making sure that a leader with integrity, committed to best practices, confident enough to call out leadership on corrupt practices, and worst of all, wanting to include others in information sharing, was lied to, destabilized, and driven out. Controlling information, keeping what's really happening under the radar, ensuring that darkness covers dangerous practices such as sidelining elite police officers to Wimbledon or allowing bullying or failing to protect vulnerable groups, especially in need of police protection, cannot withstand any attention from others. Information must be kept closely guarded when it is suspect and corrupt. Transparency threatens the bullying and gaslighting culture that depends on institutional complicity to keep it hidden. Strict practices present power, credibility, and social standing to the media and use language and cognition to ensure that risk and trustworthiness and shameful practices are kept hidden. In our society, you are criminally charged if you steal from a shop, but you can steal colleagues' livelihoods, careers, and health, far too often with impunity. Wilson not only lost a stellar career when he was at the top of his game, had immense amounts to contribute and the kind of integrity that could have turned the Met Police around and avoided the damning report by Baroness Casey and the erosion of trust in their critical role in society. Wilson also came close to losing his life through suicide. His 28 years of dedication to the police took place in London. After he was betrayed and ostracized, he chose to put distance between himself and the Met Police to maintain his sanity. He told me, quote, "I just had to get out. I felt relief. I needed to dissociate myself with all of it. This happened in 2014, and in 2020, I was still recovering." Targets of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity often feel imprisoned by their betrayal. Although innocent, they can feel trapped and suffer the kind of trauma that makes a return to health and wellness a significant challenge. For 6 years, Wilson did trauma counseling. He told me about walking along the Thames and feeling the pull of suicidal ideation. Wilson shares that he experienced contrasting feelings. Quote, "I felt like if I go over there, I'll end it, and it will show what they've done to me. But as soon as I thought that if I go over, they win. They'll still deny what they're doing, and they'll win." Those who engage in institutional complicity with bullying in the workplace would be taken aback to hear that their behaviors are also bullying. When you dismiss and deny an employee's bullying trauma, you are bullying with an added layer of gaslighting. Wilson cannot stand that his leadership's response to his suicide would be further denial, further gaslighting, full-on institutional complicity. Wilson explained to me that a key thought process for him at remaining safe from self-harm was to think, these people have already harmed you. Don't let them harm you further. Today is the first day of your recovery. Let's turn the tables. Notice the sign for new community, let's. As a team, as a group, as concerned citizens, as people who are trustworthy, turn the tables. It is indicative of a conscious refusal to be ostracized and isolated. They may have driven out the truth teller, the one with integrity, at the Met, but that does not mean for 1 minute Wilson is unworthy and does not belong. He can recognize those bullying lies and reject them. He can create new community beyond the abusive workplace. Wilson's next expression of what went through his head after they took away so much from him, namely his career, his salary, his community, his track record, his reputation, his health, is particularly poignant but also powerful. You think this is the only way out when you're at the bottom. I knew this. I had to talk to lots of people in policing about suicide. When things feel like they're at their worst, they can only get better. I also link it to family because one of the things going through my head is my daughter is 8 years old. and she needed me. At your worst, you need to remember there are people that love you, that rely on you, that need you. Those perpetrators are not only harming you further, but they'll be harming those people who you care for. They will be winning and they won't be held accountable. Wilson expresses here the wisdom of a mental health professional, the love of a father, and the courage that drives a counterterrorism expert to refuse to let manipulation by destabilizing rule the day. As he did for almost 3 decades as a police officer, he won't rest while perpetrators are harming people. He won't let them win because he knows firsthand in the most painful way that with every victim they take down, they infect their family, their friends, and community with grief, loss, and suffering. It's trauma that won't disappear anytime soon. The counterterrorism expert tells us that part of his mission is that perpetrators of terror may win and not be held accountable, but not on his watch. What's tragic is that his thoughts that led him to counsel other suicidal police, and that he applies to himself in this fraught moment aren't about terrorists. They're in response to his colleagues,